You think the censorship is your ally, but you merely adopted the censorship. I was born in it, molded by it. I didn't see the freedom of expression until I was already a man. And then it just made me an edgelord. The censorship betrays you because it belongs to me. So, hello and welcome to this episode of Media Musings. I see Sammy Jenkins enjoyed the cold open.
Hey, Sammy. Hey, Sammy. Hey, Meganuts.
Yeah. So yeah, there was just enough votes for the Dark Knight spoof that it beat out the Matrix spoof in my poll, even with the weighting I gave to patrons.
Oh, wow.
Well, to be fair, I have one patron.
Did you give what else was in the poll? Because I missed it between being away and everything. So
yeah. So actually,
pop it up. Let's see the votes.
Yeah. Hold on. So share screen. Chrome tab. So
what's up? Okay, just mate. Oh, it's close though.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's about as close as the American election. That's pretty good.
Yeah. And of course, we also have Amiga Nuts and Hissy's Hideaway also in the chat. So hello and welcome to you both. And of course, anyone who is lurking or maybe watching in the future.
I do have a question, Ring. Did you allow enough time for recounts and litigation before you announced the winner?
But yeah, basically, also I did set up a patron-only poll, but I do have one patron, and I did count. The way I weighted it was the patron-only poll counted for double.
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
And which way did the patron vote?
They voted. Santi voted Matrix.
Ah, okay. The Santi voted for the Matrix.
Yeah.
Batman. Yeah. I can't, Sam. I can't do it. I was going to do the Batman thing, but I've caught in my throat. I'm Batman. I can normally do that, but I can normally do it, but I something in my keeps catching in my throat when I try to do that today, so I won't. So.
And you could have done Iron Man in there as well, and then you could have done I Am Iron Man.
Well,
we have a Hulk.
Yeah.
We have a Hulk, yeah. We have a Hulk. Yeah. Were you using Dominion, were you?
Little, so exclamation point this claim is contested by official sources.
Yeah.
There is no collusion.
So, anyways,
Fake news.
we're somewhat continuing the discussion, somewhat branching into a new discussion. And if you're watching this in the future and you missed the Asterix stream end of season party, I suggest
Go back and watch it.
Yeah, you go back and watch it. I'll probably put a link in the description later. Because
and remember, if Ring's at over 1,000 subs by then, Jeff's not. Go and sub to Jeff.
Yeah.
And sub to Hissy.
Oh, fun fact. So I only lost 1 sub from the Orlando stream.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so I dropped from 150 to 149.
That could just be like YouTube being funny anyway.
Yeah. So yeah,
that was a good stream.
I went past 300 subscribers on 3 occasions, I think, or maybe 4.
Considering I basically made you and Hissy read the book in a week.
Yeah. But and hello, Never Again and GeoSam. So, comic and so what you may disagree with is the fact that I listed comic books as a medium rather than as a genre, but comics are a medium. Sorry, you're wrong.
I agree with you with that, Ring.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
Now, I will say that comics are a medium dominated by a certain genre, that being the superhero genre.
Yeah.
But there are reasons for that.
Which we will go into.
Yes, because the thing is, comics the comics we know today were very much born of an intensive period or a decade of intensive censorship.
Yeah.
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 Well, I mean, comic books are older than the hero genre too. I mean,
well, because the modern comic book, the modern comic book dates back to like the 20s, 30s ish.
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of the time you had like the newspaper comic strips.
No, but you also had books that were released of the strips that were in the comics.
Yeah,
and that was still done.
Well, that's what they would initially started to do. That they would be reprints of things that have been in the newspaper strips, and they'd be sold as an individual book. Like I think like the Funnies was one of the first ones. But there was also like the pulps as well, which around the same time, which did sort of a mixture of comic strips and short stories, the pulp stories, and perhaps some of the characters, and you could kind of argue with like the superhero genre that it could possibly even go back further than say Superman to sort of characters like Flash Gordon or the Phantom or whatever. You could possibly argue, but obviously, you get to Superman, and that's definitely a game changer.
Yeah.
Well, Superman is widely regarded as the first comic book, superhero.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
it was the comic strip that pretty much every newspaper had turned down.
Yeah.
It was and Detective Comics, DC took a chance on it for first in a line they were going to do called Action Comics, and it was an immediate success.
Well, and the thing is, in the golden age of comics, so we're talking late 30s to early 50s.
Yeah.
Swear it's not COVID.
Yeah.
But anyways, yes, we know the the concept of the hero goes back to the earliest literature we have records for.
Yeah.
Yes, but they weren't comic books, so the
Well,
hero genre is
also
old. No.
what I mean is also the figure of the hero is I would say arguably different from the superhero in the terms of the superhero genre.
Yes and no. I mean, there are definitely heroes of antiquities who were given a certain amount of power. I mean, Hercules is a good example of that.
Yeah,
I mean,
and you know, and Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
But
Samson, if you want to get biblical, you know.
Yeah.
Well, we need Hissy in here for discussing antiquities.
I mean, and you know, it could also, you know, you could also argue that obviously, I wouldn't necessarily call it comics, but like you know, visual, like you know, visual depictions of stories that sort of working almost like a panel thing as you go along. You know, you can talk about obviously hieroglyphs. You could talk about Trajan's column in Rome. You can talk the Bayeux Tapestry. You know,
definitely
just some examples.
But what I mean is, you know, so yes, the concept of powered heroes is as old as the literature itself.
Yeah.
But the concept, but you know, the superhero genre itself isn't just powered heroes. You know, it's not just grand quests fighting, you know, gods and such, which is gods and monsters, which is what a lot of these mythic heroes that the superhero genre does pull from, you know, kind of touches on. It takes that, you know, that concept and brings it more down to earth, kind of, but not.
Well, I think the way to best put it is, I mean, let's start with Superman. He's probably like the regarded as the first superhero. I mean, ironically, a character that was the original story that Siegel and Schuster wrote was more along the lines of the Superman being a kind of a villain, like an alien villain.
And he was like telepathic, not like the original Superman story is like almost black and white difference from what we got in the original Superman comics.
Yeah, and then I can't remember which of the two it was. I think it may have been Jerry Siegel. It might have been Siegel, I think, that that actually thought about the idea of making this guy a good guy, and more was because he said he'd often thought about what if I could have these sort of powers, and I think this is one of the things that certainly which is probably the most established sort of trope of the superhero genre is established with Superman, which is the secret identity. And that the fact that you had someone who seemed as, you know, meek and as normal and as average as Clark Kent, who could suddenly just, you know, turn it off and be super. It was, in a way, it was that identity thing that made the superhero accessible in a way that people could like say, "Oh, I could be that guy," and then, you know.
And since we are, you know, talking about Superman first, you know what? I'll go ahead and share this screen now. We're not going to talk about this particular issue yet, but there is a point I do want to illustrate because I am going to possibly lose viewers and discuss a rather raging controversy in regards to Superman.
Okay.
But
okay.
So, anyways,
this looks familiar.
Yeah. So this is the cover of Superman issue 62. Basically, it was produced near the end of the Golden Era, but as you can see, Superman is wearing what looks like underwear on the outside of his costume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the reason why I am all for the Superman trunks, the red portion of the costume, is because of, well, one, it's the classic look. So you can call me a bit of a purist for that, but there is a reason that that Superman has those trunks. It's a visual shorthand.
I've just got an imposed thing, so I can look at that a bit more closely. And interesting, what's on the cover there. I'll just say that.
Yeah,
reminds us of something we talked about a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But anyways, but essentially, when Siegel and Schuster made Superman, they gave him a pair of they gave him the trunks as a visual nod to circus strongmen, which was a visual shorthand to let the audience know that he is inhumanly strong. Yeah. PJ Smith has it right there. It was.
Hey,
yeah.
It was like the reason superheroes usually wear tights is because the character designs were lifted from strongmen, gymnasts, things that images that tell the reader that these characters are strong and agile and capable.
Yeah. Of course, that changed later as people got to know what comic books were about.
Yeah.
So you ended up with,
And character designs did evolve, which is, why we've got a plethora of different, costume looks today. But during the Golden Age, it wasn't just about the superhero comic. There were comic books of pretty much any genre. In fact, gangster and horror comics were especially popular during the Golden Age.
Well, there's a clue in the. I'll say there's a big clue in the name of DC. That stands for Detective Comics.
Yep.
Very popular genre.
And in fact,
started with Batman.
Yep.
Yeah. The original detective, because that's what he was. He was a.
Also,
well, he came after Superman. I would say that, but
but he did Batman did get his start in the line called Detective Comics.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Superman actually didn't start in DC, though, did he? He was one of the other ones.
No, Superman did. Yeah. Superman and Batman did get their start in the same company. It was different comic titles.
Okay.
Like, for instance,
because Batman was actually Detective Comics.
So. Yeah.
It was Action Comics that Superman started in.
That's right. Yeah. But it's all DC now. It's all one thing. Yeah.
And so, but anyways, and throughout, World War II, comics became very seen as kind of a vehicle for propaganda.
Oh, definitely.
Very, very.
Yeah.
Well, let's put it this way. We've often, Hissy and I have often talked on our Asterix streams about, so to say, sort of problems with caricatures.
Yeah.
If you look at some of the golden age caricatures of the Japanese in golden age comics, with like, if you look at some of the like the Captain America, the early Captain America one, as an
I was
example.
about to talk about Captain
like,
America.
They don't stand up well at all today.
Yeah.
If you go to Captain America, you're talking about a wartime propaganda. That was basically what Captain America was made for.
Yeah.
He fights the Germans. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say the word that might get the stream taken off.
Yeah.
The way they characterize the bad guys throughout it is total propaganda of what was happening and everything. And he wears a red, white, and blue to propagandize that. And then after that, he went and propagandized the Cold War, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
But obviously you saw that a lot of that as well. I think Wonder Woman, you look at her original costume.
Yeah.
There's a propaganda element of that there, the red, white, and blue, and the stars and everything.
Yeah.
That's a whole. That could be. Wonder Woman could be a whole stream in itself with some of the interesting stuff about her creator.
A lot of heck. We could basically make whole streams off certain runs or even certain issues. But there's a reason I looked up. I got the cover of Superman 62. Because this is basically peak Golden Age right here.
Yeah.
We have Superman and Orson Welles
fighting Martians.
Fighting Martian Nazis.
Yeah.
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 And I mean, it is slightly problematic because Superman does technically commit a genocide in it. But I unironically love this issue. But yeah, so basically, a quick rundown of this story is the Martians picked up the radio broadcasts from the Reich, and they thought, hey, this Hitler guy has some good ideas. Let's copy him. And, and Orson Welles finds out that, he gets kidnapped by the Martian Nazis and finds out about their plan and is trying to warn the world. But obviously no one believes him because of the War of the Worlds hoax, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And Superman goes to Mars and rescues Orson Welles, and Orson Welles distracts Martler. Yes. The leader of the Solazis is called Martler or Martian Hitler. Yeah. That's the thing about the Golden Age is things were very simple, things were very blunt. Nuance, that's kind of the way with a when it comes to talking about Shazam can be its own stream. A lot of the things we bring up here can very much be their own stream in and of themselves, because we are talking about a medium.
Yeah.
Now, and
I'm just wondering. I mean, with PJ's apparent knowledge in the chat, does PJ actually want to hop in and actually join us?
Yeah.
PJ.
Yeah. We'll see.
We'll see.
Well, yeah. But things in the Golden Age were very very simple, more focused on dynamic poses, and it was the infancy of the superhero genre, and it was the infancy of the comic book as a medium. It's where we got a lot of the visual language kind of set into stone. Like for instance, how the heroes will always be dressed in, or usually be dressed in primary colors, like reds, blues, yellows, and how the villains will be dressed in greens and purples, so you have the visual contrast.
And yet we have Green Lanterns.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, yeah. Golden Age Green Lantern kind of breaks that.
Well, no, it doesn't, because the Golden Age Green Lantern is red, green, and yellow.
Let's see.
And there also isn't a Green Lantern Court.
Yeah.
That came later.
Yeah. Like Hal. Yeah, Alan. Yeah, oh, yeah, because
Alan, is that Alan?
Yeah, let's see. Hold on.
I can't remember that. Hal Jordan was not the first Green Lantern.
Well, actually, no. I actually, when you look at Alan Scott's, hold on, I'm gonna bring it up so that people can actually see it. Let's see.
Am I misremembering?
Open image, a new tab. Gonna do a quick share screen.
Yeah, and Green Arrow.
Let's see. Well, Green Arrow is a different thing, because Green Arrow is literally just kind of Robin Hood.
And Green Arrow is technically a vigilante, and though he does good things, is not necessary. Is a character with dubious morals to a certain extent.
Yeah. So, you can see that Alan Scott technically breaks that rule. I mean, yeah, there is the red in the shirt and the boots, but his costume is primarily, green and purple.
Yeah. Now, Alan Scott's Green Lantern is very different, because there is no Green Lantern Corps, and he actually made his own ring.
Yes, and he basically got it from a magic space rock.
Yeah.
Well, and
they retconned later that the rock came from Iowa. Iowa. That's it. Iowa. I'll get it right eventually. Yeah. And that was what enabled him to build his own lantern and his own ring. So Hal Gordon is the first Jordan, not Gordon. Yeah. Hal Jordan is the first Green Lantern that is chosen by a Green Lantern ring, because Scott actually makes his own.
Yeah, and when it comes to, and also in the Golden Age, we see a lot less super-powered heroes.
Yeah, there even Superman himself is a lot less overpowered.
Yeah, Superman's like basic, like at this point in time, Superman can't even fly.
Yeah, he can leap tall buildings. He can, because which is a feat of strength. And he can stop bullets with his hands, but it is with his hands. He basically catches them. And I don't even think he has. No, I think he has X-ray vision, but I don't think he gets his heat vision and his cold breath till later.
Yeah, he doesn't.
Yeah, so and he's extra fast, but he's not super fast for running and stuff. So
yeah, so okay, since we are talking about this kind of general rule of thumb convention in character design, So the Hulk is a very interesting case. Because one, the Hulk was originally gray, but because printing quality was so low when the first Hulk comics were coming out, by issue 3 they ditched that because they couldn't get his shade consistent from panel to panel.
Yeah,
and made him green.
Yeah,
but technically, the Hulk, even though he is even though he is, a member of the Avengers and the hero of the protagonist of a long-running series.
He didn't become an Avengers member till a lot later, though.
He was a founding member of the Avengers.
Well, he was too, because the Avengers came a lot later. Yeah.
Yeah. But even though he is considered something of a hero, he's more of an anti-hero, because basically, the Hulk gets angry and then smashes everything.
And has no control when angry enough.
So technically, even though he is a title character and a member of Marvel's answer to the Justice League, he is a very dangerous, very unstable character, and thus the green and purple color scheme, he still fits the idea of villainous or dangerous, opposing characters are purple and green.
He's also a trope for Frankenstein.
I was going to say that I was going to bring this up later because I didn't think we'd be talking Silver Age stuff right now. But but there's two sort of great sort of like literal great works of fiction. Jen just mentioned one of them. He's Frankenstein's monster. In a way, the monster in Frankenstein is misunderstood. The Hulk is misunderstood. But the other thing is Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes,
Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, that's what I meant, not Frankenstein.
Well, Jen, Frankenstein's not wrong in this. Stan Lee himself said the two things he took inspiration from with the Hulk was the Frankenstein's monster and Jekyll and Hyde, were his were a big part of his inspiration for the Hulk.
And there were in-universe explanations. First, when they changed the Hulk green in issue 3 of the Incredible Hulk, he was exposed to more gamma rays, which is what turned him green per in-universe explanation. And then later, they actually made it so that the Gray Hulk was its own personality, which eventually came to be known as Joe Fixit.
Yeah, and isn't Professor Hulk where you've got Banner's intellect mixed in with more grey than green as well? Yeah.
Which, if anyone's seen the last Avengers movie, you kind of got to see that.
You can see.
Yeah,
he's more green than grey. Grey than green. Sorry, wrong way around.
But yeah, I mean, so I think we made quite a jump there because obviously Hulk's more Silver Age. Hulk's a very much a Silver Age, and I think we were still sort of on the Golden Age. And
I mean,
I definitely, before I know where Ring's going to want to go eventually. But before we get out of Golden Age, I just want to mention one sort of trope that started in the Golden Age was teen sidekicks.
Yes.
And that's obviously the obvious one is Robin being introduced. But then you also had like Captain America had Bucky Barnes. You had you had Speedy, didn't you? It was one of them.
No, Speedy was Green Arrows.
Green Arrows.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Flash. It was Green Arrows.
Yeah.
You had So that
Flash
started
had Kid Flash.
Yeah, Jay Garrick never had a sidekick, as far as I'm aware of.
No, he had to get to Barry Allen before Barry Allen. Kid Flash around.
And the original Human Torch had a sidekick.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes. I forget his name now, but yes, he did. I forget the name of the character.
Toro,
now.
I think it was.
So yes, I think you're right.
We even in the Golden Age, we had the issue. We had a subversion of that where the hero was the kid,
Yes.
and then he had an adult sidekick. I think it was like the Star Spangled Kid and like Wimpy or something.
Well, I mean, PJ brought it up in the chat. I'll touch on it briefly because, as you said, it could be a stream in itself. Well, the first one you had with a hero was a kid, was a character called Captain Marvel.
Yes.
He says his magic word Shazam, which turned him into, and of course, there's a whole history there of legal issues between DC and Fawcett Comics, who originally published. There's a whole story of a legal back because they felt this was too much of a
copy of Superman.
Yes. Now, believe it or not, Captain Marvel had nothing to do with Marvel Comics. All right, just people understand the original Captain Marvel we're talking about here, who is now known as Shazam.
Yeah.
This was this was a success because you just said about earlier about the superheroes being accessible by these identities. Now, bear in mind that the majority of the comics at the time were read by young boys. The fact that you had a young boy that could change into this superhero that was every bit as powerful as super. And I think, let's be clear, Captain Marvel was outselling Superman for a while as well.
Oh, yeah.
Which is probably why the legal issues started coming about. I don't think DC would have paid it too much notice had it not been a serious Fawcett Comics had a serious competitor on their hand. You know, DC had a very serious.
You know, which kind of makes it ironic that DC eventually picked up the character but lost the rights to the name.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anyway that the way things gone, that they would have dared to call one of their characters Captain Marvel, considering what was to come in years. Yeah. Because obviously, what the other big comic company at the time is Timely Comics.
Yes.
As well, which would become, I forget what year it became Atlas Comics for a while. But this is what would eventually become Marvel.
Yes.
Yeah.
First, Toro was originally featured in Timely Comics and later published as a Marvel Comics superhero, appeared as the partner of the original Human Torch. Yes, that's what I was referring to. Because Timely would eventually become Marvel. That's why they have Captain America. That's why they have the original Human Torch. That
Namor the Submariner, you know.
Yeah, Namor the Submariner is technically one of the first mutants. It's like, it depends on how you define it.
Yeah.
Because if you're going first created, then it's Namor. Because he is the first.
But he was retconned into being a mutant, though.
Oh, yeah, he was retconned into being a mutant, but he was the first character published who is a mutant.
And then, you know, obviously, well, he's obviously the king of this underwater kingdom. And then DC obviously would then bring out Aquaman. And this is one of the things you will see with the constant, just blatant plagiarizing of each other's characters at times.
Yeah.
And I say this with irony
let's
because
talk about the biggest one then.
Well, I'm wearing a Deadpool t-shirt. Okay, so I was going to go there, but that, I mean, I know we're jumping way out of chronology.
Oh, we've jumped beyond Silver Age to do this one.
Yeah. But Deathstroke, who's an assassin called Slade Wilson. And so Marvel then put on this thing called. It was almost a parody on it.
It is a parody. It is definitely a parody.
Deadpool, and it's Wade Wilson.
Yeah.
And amazingly, I don't think that was even Stan Lee that came up with that name, and because he's known for the whole Peter Parker, Matt Murdock, the sort
alliterative names, and the reason why is so he can keep track of them.
Yeah, he said because he said of his memory was, it helped him memorize a lot of the.
But anyways, so
having said that, Tony Stark isn't illiterate. Isn't illiterate? Isn't an alliteration? So
we're coming to the end of the golden age where superhero comics are still popular, but they're starting to get a little bit on the wane because people are starting to get sick of seeing stories about Nazis after the end of World War II.
Yep.
And horror and crime comics are doing gangbusters. And a man named Dr. Frederick Wortham writes a book.
Yeah, I've got this here. The Seduction of the Innocent.
Yes.
Yes. Very special hatred for the superheroes, but he hated comics in general, and he for some reason had this idea that Batman and Robin were like a gay thing.
Yeah,
which is ridiculous. Wow. Which is ridiculous in itself.
It's still a trope and a joke, though.
Yeah,
the one claim he may have had that I think had some merit was that the Wonder Woman comics had a undertone of bondage and BDSM, which I would actually say was very true. If you ever saw any of the early Wonder Woman things, and anything about William Moulton Marston.
Hence the lassie.
And if anyone is sick of hearing the violent video games cause violence arguments that pop up every couple of years, this is basically the same thing but with comic books.
This is the start. This is the start of this stuff, really, whether it be TV is causing it or video games or whatever. I almost feel that this is the start of it, and I mean they had sent it was a senator, is it Estes Kefauver, I think, who held hearings on this. And Kefauver is quite famous for to be quite famous for doing Senate hearings on the Mafia a few years later. But
Seduction of the Innocent, this book where he's claiming that comic books are deteriorating American youth.
To be fair to your comment, Jeff, there have always been people who've made these claims about anything in media, because before that, novels were claimed of that and everything. He was just extending that into these.
He very much extended it into
everything, really.
Yeah, he really, but
also,
really,
also his claims got enough attention that he appeared before Congress.
Yes.
And these hearings got
Congress
the comic.
Will believe it.
Yeah, these hearings got the comic book industry so paranoid that they instituted self-censorship before the government could censor them.
Oh, yeah.
They instituted something called the Comics Code Authority.
Yes.
Or the CCA.
Yeah, that was established in 1954.
Yep.
And it was a lot of it. It was what I suppose what had to happen was that the various publishers would send out any issue that they were going to publish to get the seal of approval from the comics, and there was a logo on each comic that was issued, approved by the Comics Code Authority.
Yeah.
And there was an awful lot of it was like, there was an awful lot of things like,
well, I've got the comment. I've got the guidelines right here.
The list, yeah.
Yeah. Shall we go through it?
Yeah. So, and the thing is, as I mentioned before, horror and gangster comics were crazy popular as we were getting towards the end of the Golden Age. But we don't really see many horror or crime themed comics today. And as you will see, the Comics Code is a big reason why. Let's see, I'll zoom in a bit.
I mean, there are the odd one or two, but there are the exceptions, but those genres are not.
So, that's readable, or should I go in more?
No, that's readable.
I can't read that at all, but if you want to put a link to the website in the private chat, I can bring it up and read it.
I'll put it in the main chat.
Yeah. All right.
There we go.
Oh, hold on.
And you want it in the private too?
Yeah. Just
so anyone who wants to follow along.
Yeah. So
it's in there.
General standards. So, and this is the kind of censorship we're looking at, and that was self-imposed. This document shaped what comics would become, and why when people think of comic books, they think of the genre of the superhero comic rather than a thriving medium as it should have been. So, crime shall never be presented in such a way as to create sympathy for the criminal, to promote distrust of the forces of law and justice, or to inspire others with a desire to imitate criminals.
Yeah.
No comics shall explicitly present the unique details and methods of a crime. I kind of get that. I kind of get that one. It's like you don't want to teach someone how to break into the Pentagon
or make a bomb.
Yeah. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority.
Well, that one can go out the fucking window.
Yeah. If crime is depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity. Okay. Criminals shall not be presented so as to be rendered glamorous or to occupy a position which creates a desire for emulation. So literally, so far, according to this, you could not make a comic book about the stories of Robin Hood.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's amazing. You go through it. I mean, it's a long old list they got here.
Yeah.
It's a long list.
Yeah.
I don't know if we had time to read through all of it, but
I'm gonna scroll through it, hit the highlights. For instance, in every instance, good shall triumph over evil, and the criminal punished for his misdeeds.
Yeah, there's reality for you.
This reason here is why when they tried to do a Joker, a Joker issue, it flopped. They tried to give Joker his own standalone series like in the 60s, And because of the comics, and because of that stipulation, it did terribly because every issue had to end with the Joker being thrown back in jail.
Here, I mean, and if you look at some of these, I'll pick one or two out. I'll pick a couple up. The end of Part A, last one in Part A, restraint in the use of the word crime in titles and subtitles shall be exercised. And you go to Part B, which is deals a bit more with horror comics. Yeah. No comic magazine shall use the word horror or terror in its title.
Yeah.
Which and this is why this is why we don't see any horror, or we don't see we rarely see any horror or gangster comics.
Yeah, I mean
in that era.
No, even today.
Even now, I mean, you've got exceptions like The Walking Dead, maybe, is an exception. But...
Yeah. Anything from Dark Horse.
Scenes dealing with or instruments associated with Walking Dead, torture, vampires and vampirism, ghouls, cannibalism, and werewolfism are prohibited.
So The Walking Dead would not have been a thing in the 50s,
Or all lurid, unsavory, gruesome illustrations shall be eliminated. Inclusion of stories dealing with evil shall be used or shall be published only where the intent is to illustrate a moral issue, and in no case shall evil be presented alluringly, nor so as to injure the sensibilities of the reader.
Yeah. Also, they weren't allowed to have lust.
Yeah.
Or depravity. Oh, that's disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Profanity, obscenity, smut, vulgarity, or words or symbols which have acquired undesirable meanings are forbidden.
Oh, so you can have a sex scene? Okay.
Special precautions to avoid references to physical afflictions or deformities shall be taken.
So let's not be realistic.
I mean, you got one or two here, like ridicule or attack of any religious or racial group is never permissible, which is something I can kind of get behind that to a degree, because
but given how this was released in 1950s America, we know which religion it's written so that it technically covers all religions, but we know which religion is specifically.
Let's put it this way: if they did a thing on like ridiculed, should we say a non-Abrahamic religion in that period, I think it would have gotten the stamp of approval.
Well, I mean, we still got Thor and Wonder Woman in the Silver Age.
Yeah,
and this is also why comic books are so dodgy on depicting figures from the Judeo-Christian mythos.
Yeah.
Or
at least they were.
Well, we got some. We got some good ones of sort of like Lucifer a bit later on. Like Neil Gaiman, love the man. Sorry,
but and why most mainstream comic books don't have Yahweh as a god. They just have an amorphous deistic,
the one above all.
In Marvel Comics they have the one above all. In DC they have, I think they do actually call him God, but he's the closest.
No, he's definitely called God, because you also have Lucifer. And...
the closest thing. Yeah, but the closest thing any of the characters have to interacting with God is with the Spectre, which is, his spirit of vengeance.
But you also get that the archangels do appear in various comics as well.
Yeah,
DC. So,
but let's see.
Divorce shall not be treated humorously or represented as desirable. Yeah, whoa.
Yeah, exactly.
Respect for parents, the moral code, and for honorable behavior shall be fostered. A sympathetic understanding of the problems of love is not a license for morbid distortion.
I want to see one about
sexual abnormalities.
Yeah.
You know what they're getting at there.
Yeah.
See,
wow.
Funny thing is that the only thing going up above it with costumes is a suggestive or salacious illustration or suggestive posture is unacceptable. But I mean, it's not to do with costume, but there's a brilliant panel which I'd like to talk about in a bit. Which is a Silver Age thing. It's just one panel that is so suggestive that it's perfect, you know.
Yeah, and I think
they said something about perversion.
Yeah.
What was that?
Basically anything that doesn't match up with, one man, one woman missionary position, but not even showing that.
Sex perversion, sex perversion or any inference to same is strictly forbidden.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The problem with this is that most of these rules rely on subjective views of what undesirably good taste and decency are.
Yeah.
And of course, the standards that were being held to this code were the standards of 1950s America. In all of its puritanical fucked upness.
Oh, yeah.
But
let's be fair, they don't actually follow all of these anymore.
Well, no, actually, the Comics Code Authority is dead and gone now.
Oh, yes, yeah. It's been dead for... I mean, it did... I mean, even in a long way, because it did go into the sort of... I mean, technically, it went right up into the 2010s, but no one was really paying it much attention by then. Anyway.
Yeah, at the end of the Comics Code Authority, it was literally just a granny in her basement doing it for the love of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last company to carry the Comics Code Authority seal of approval was Archie Comics.
Archie, yes. But like the main the big comic companies, I think towards the end of the 60s and maybe into the 70s, that by then they and I think what you obviously started getting in the Silver Age a lot though was a lot of these things still fell within the Comics Code Authority, but they did push the envelope on what they could get away with that.
Well, what it seems to have been the case in the Silver Age was one, we had the Comics Code Authority tampering down on what was acceptable in comics, and two, and because of that, things began to get a little stale. And we also got the new wave of sci-fi. So a lot of science fiction concepts were becoming very popular among the public. So this is where the superhero comic, because it was pretty much the only so say the comic book as a medium was like Earth in the late Cretaceous, right? The Comics Code Authority is the asteroid. The superhero comic genre are the little scurrying mammals.
Yeah. To be honest as well, I'd say by the end of the 50s, even that genre, which was the only one left, had become stale creatively.
Yeah.
It had been toned down to, I mean, at one time, even with the superheroes, it seems that only Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman were left almost, you know, and it's almost as if Wonder Woman had almost become the domestic housewife almost.
Yeah.
It had gotten that bad. And you had all those silly Superman spin-offs, didn't you, as well?
Yeah, like Superman, Superboy, Supergirl,
Superdog.
Yes.
Yeah.
Astro, the Wonder Dog.
It's Crypto.
Crypto.
Sorry, Astro was
Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen got their own comics.
Yeah.
And of course, because they had to keep the readership's attention, and because they couldn't really explore, you know, interesting sociological or philosophical issues because of the Comics Code Authority, we had some really bizarre shit happening in the Silver Age.
We did. I mean, I don't know if I'll tell this. I mean, this is I suppose the legend. I don't know how much of this is true, but this is the one that DC did start a line called the Justice League using a lot of the existing superheroes, which was a big seller. And as the legend goes, at the time, Martin Goodman, who was the publisher of what was then Atlas Comics, formerly Timely, was playing golf with the publisher from DC, and he said, and DC guy told him, well, we've got this new line called Justice League, so that group of superheroes, it's selling really well. So he went back to his head writer, one Stan Lee, said, I think we need a group of superheroes. And I do say according to legend, because Stan Lee used to tell this story all the time. Yeah. Although I've got reason to sometimes, as much as I love Stan Lee, I've got reason to sort of have doubts over one or two of his stories that he's told in the past. But the legend is that Stan Lee was on the verge of quitting. He'd just gotten sick of it, and that he they'd been asked to write this book, and he said, well, I'm going to write this one and I'm going to quit. So his wife had said, well, why don't you just for once write a book the way you want to write? If you're going to quit anyway, what's the worst that can happen? So he wrote the Fantastic Four, and which was became a very popular comic book, and suddenly all of a sudden he was finding he was getting a bit more creative freedom to do stuff. I mean, that's certainly the legend, and it's certainly the thing Stan Lee loved to tell.
Well, and the thing is, so now before we get into Marvel and Marvel's role in ending the Silver Age, I will make a point of clarification. Now, a lot of people date the start of the Silver Age with the first appearance of Barry Allen. They say, okay, that's the start of the Silver Age. I differ slightly. From my point of view, the way what I point to as the start of the Silver Age is the creation of the Comics Code Authority and the Seduction of the Innocent publication. It's like a difference of like 1 or 2 years, but the way I view things as happening, the Comics Code Authority was what made the Silver Age the Silver Age.
Yeah. I mean, because the Flash, the new Flash came out 56, I believe. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in a way, this obviously the censorship of the Comics Code sort of coming, but I mean, this is one of the things that I mean, when they redid the Flash, that was a big seller for DC.
Yeah. But
I mean,
so,
and then you'd actually, from like the 70s onwards, you'd get into what sometimes was called the Bronze Age.
yep.
Well,
so yeah, we're going in. So, we're going into the 60s. Things are getting kind of stale. So DC decides to mix things up by playing it safe and making a team book. And, Stan Lee's boss hears about it playing golf and tells Stan Lee to write a team book, and the Fantastic Four is written, according to legend.
Yeah.
Now, and here's where we get Marvel accidentally ending the Silver Age, because so DC being having a long history of being a big comic book, they had the really popular, big comic book company. They had the really popular characters. They had Superman, they had Batman. I think they might have had Shazam at this point, but maybe that was still being litigated. Yeah, I think Fawcett had gone under and they scooped up Shazam. They already either created or sucked up Green Lantern and the Flash.
Yeah.
Basically, at this point, DC's brand is Comics Code approved, big name characters and team up stories.
Yeah.
So Marvel starts basically branding themselves as the edgy comic company, where they do things that push the like they try and see how far they can get with the Comics Code Authority.
Well, we touched on this earlier when we talked about the Hulk.
Yeah.
Now, who's the Hulk's big enemy in a lot of the early comics was the U.S. Army.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. So hold on. You read the Comics Code Authority. You can't treat the institutions of the government as being bad in any way. So, but they would pass it off. It's not that the army is the U.S. Army is bad. They're just misinformed. They don't that's all it is. It was little things like that.
And because Hulk's a almost an anti-hero, rather than an actual hero, you can get away with that because he's not always the good guy. So the army have to chase him to an extent.
I can't find that panel that I was on about earlier. I was looking for it online, but it's just a little later on this is a little later on. So I'm jumping chronologically. I'm jumping a few years here, but when Marvel took on a new artist called Jim Steranko. And ironic. I mean, again, this is kind of the legends of this, and I think both Stan Lee and Jim Steranko have both their stories kind of somewhat match on this, and that Steranko had come to Marvel looking for work, and he'd shown some of his art to Stan Lee, and was like, and he said, I don't have anything permanent, but he says, you're too damn good of an artist for me to turn you away. So he just gave him a list of second run titles or whatever, not the main ones, and said, just pick one and do what you can with that. And the one he got picked was Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Yeah. And then they told this story where, and this was, where originally Steranko went to a whole scene in the bedroom kind of thing, which was never going to get past the Comic Code's Authority. And then the whole way it was changed was that they got to the seat where it's quite clearly they've gone to the, him and the woman he's with has gone to the bedroom to do whatever, and the panel is just Nick Fury's gun in the holster, hanging off a chair. And just that panel alone is so goddamn suggestive. You know what they're going to do, but it was, in a lot of ways, it was more suggestive than them actually seeing them go into the bedroom.
Yeah.
Which is why movies do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Also a very popular teenage superhero, which is also somewhat drawn in almost a manner of a horror comic. In the lovely and classic art style of Steve Ditko.
Yeah. Spider-Man.
Yeah. Because I couldn't find any good ones. But if you look at a lot of the early panels of Spider-Man doing his wall crawling, he's lurking in the shadows out to get.
Yeah.
But it's not horror.
No.
Now this is where a lot of the controversy around Stan Lee comes in over this, isn't it? Over whether he actually had a hand in creating Spider-Man or whether that was a Steve Ditko.
Honestly, I
don't know.
I kind of subscribe to some of column A, some of column B.
I definitely think it was a co-creation. I do think that, but I think there was a big. There's always been a big controversy over who really created Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And yet you cannot deny that he is one of their biggest draws.
Oh,
he is. I mean, he is their Spider-Man.
He was their logo for a while.
Spider-Man. I mean, probably if DC's biggest, if DC's main character is Superman, Marvel's will be Spider-Man. Spider-Man is the Spider-Man was their the flagship.
Yeah.
Although they've kind of pushed that mantle onto Iron Man with the.
I think maybe with the cinematic universe, but Spider-Man was the flagship comic of Marvel for so many years,
And one of the best characters they tried to put onto the big screen.
Well, and the thing is, Spider-Man was originally you have those stories where it's the guy, the business experts no, don't do this.
Again,
and then it becomes a massive success.
And again, this is the Stan Lee telling of the story. We got a program. This is the Stan Lee, because it was a throwaway from on the last issue of a
Amazing Fantasy, I believe.
Amazing Fantasy or something.
Yeah.
Issue number 15. So it was almost a throwaway, and apparently Stan Lee had. And again, I'm just giving. This is Stan Lee's version of the story.
Yeah.
He had pitched this character to Martin Goodman, the publisher, and who just trashed the idea. They said, "What the kid shouldn't be a superhero," and the fact that he said, "I want him to have all the problems like normal teenage, like teenage boys have, the acne and the." Not being good with girls and whatever. And Martin Goodman apparently just rubbished it, but they put it out and the book sold really well.
Yeah.
And then
I don't know why they didn't think that wouldn't work.
And then apparently Martin Goodman came to Stan Lee and says, "Hey, do you remember that Spider-Man character we both liked so much? Why don't you do a series of this?" Now, again, this is Stan Lee's version of events here. So, and again, like I said, there's controversy over this. So, but it's a good story.
But And hold on. Let's see. Open image in new tab. Okay, so we're gonna do a quick little bit of comparison. So if I can actually get the tech to work.
I'll be back in 2 secs. Got 2 minutes, guys. All right.
Okay.
I need painkillers.
Yeah. So everyone look at our old friend Superman number 62.
Yep.
So, this is what we have right here, for end of the golden age.
Yeah.
Right? Now, and just do a little pre-zoom in. So, and here, about a decade or so later, stop screen, share screen, because we have kind of near the end of the Silver Age with
Lizard Man.
With
considering the rules about werewolves and I mean the Lizard Man is legitimately a horror.
Yeah, the lizard. Where we have Marvel pushing the buttons. We have Marvel trying to see where the limits of the Comics Code Authority. Technically they're playing by the rules, but they're pushing things.
Yeah.
And thus Marvel is beginning to pick up in popularity and beginning to be seen as a very viable competitor to DC.
The Marvel Age of Comics is here.
Yes.
I mean, it isn't any wonder that Marvel were the first ones to get rid of the CCA.
Yeah. Well, fun fact, Marvel actually did write a comic that was the first comic that they wrote, I think it may have been the first, that didn't carry the CC, that was rejected, from the CCA for the seal of approval, was actually commissioned by the federal government. Because the government wanted Marvel to do a Spider-Man issue, an anti-drug Spider-Man issue. And because of their depictions of drugs, it was rejected by the CCA.
So my question for the CCA though is, did Marvel ever actually just publish some comics even if without the CCA stamp approval?
So the way the CCA was set up to work was basically newsstands and eventually comic book shops wouldn't carry any books that weren't CCA labeled, CCA approved. So
but obviously later, once you started having things like Dark Horse and that, once you started having the indie comics especially come out from the mid 80s onwards, even earlier than that the comic book stores had them because they were selling. So
so basically as Marvel started pushing the issue and kind of leading the charge, and DC slowly beginning to catch up with some of their more expendable books, like for instance Green Arrow, and also Green Arrow and Green Lantern, where we get to see some of the some social commentary. Like for instance, snowbirds don't fly, where we learn that Speedy is addicted to cocaine or heroin, and it's basically an issue where Green Arrow helps, finds out that Speedy is addicted to heroin and tries to get him clean.
Yeah.
So we begin to see comics starting to mature near the end of the Silver Age, beginning of the Bronze Age, where they can start taking on these more socially relevant issues. And this is also where we see Marvel bringing out their civil rights analogy known as the X-Men.
Yeah.
And of course the X-Men can very well be its own topic, and why technically, in my opinion, the Fox movies, the analogy of the X-Men, mutants as a oppressed minority, doesn't work as well in the Fox series as it does in Marvel Comics.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how they cope with them in the MCU.
Yeah. Also, I will say this, especially in the beginning, Magneto is actually the better. Magneto is actually the more ethical party in that conflict.
Absolutely. Professor Xavier is very, very manipulative.
Yeah.
And yeah, he even if his motives may be more noble.
Hold on. I need to address something. Sammy Jenkins, Speedy is not the Flash's sidekick. Speedy is Green Arrow's sidekick.
I made that mistake earlier myself.
Yeah. Though at this point in time, we did have the introduction of Wally West as Barry Allen's sidekick.
Yeah.
But he went under the name Kid Flash.
Yeah. Because that's one thing I know Stan Lee himself always tried to avoid, was he did not like the kid sidekick trope.
Yeah, which is I think possibly partially why so many of his protagonists are just teens themselves. Like, for instance, Spider-Man was originally a high schooler.
Yeah.
The X-Men were all teenagers.
Yes. Yeah.
But they're all characters in their own right. They're not sidekicks.
Yeah.
I mean, there really isn't a lot of sidekicks in Marvel at all. It's very much DC more.
One of the things I will definitely give, whether it be Stan Lee or Steve Ditko, whoever came up with this was Spider-Man, was I think for the first time you got a reason. Well, I mean, okay, you can maybe say in the Golden Age with Batman, you understand why he does what he does.
Yeah.
A lot of the characters, they got their powers or whatever, and then they just become superheroes. But why? Why do they become superheroes?
Yeah.
One of the great things about Spider-Man is he gets his powers. He doesn't think about becoming a superhero. He looks at cashing in. He becomes a professional wrestler, decides to cash in. And Spider-Man is driven by the guilt of the fact that, he let this criminal get away because he said, hey, not my problem kind of thing. And it led to the death of his uncle. Spider-Man is driven by his guilt of that.
Yeah.
And also the fact that even with the secret identity thing, that is built in that if, why would a superhero have a secret identity? And it's like, well, if people know who I really am, my enemies are going to come after the people I love.
Yeah, and actually,
and it was a real,
and it even extends to other Marvel characters that were created during this time.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, Iron Man. A lot of early Iron Man stories are basically Tony Stark puts on the suit to stop someone trying to steal the government secrets that he's working on.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, you imagine that in the 1960s, in the height of the anger against the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
That somehow Marvel make this character who is, a billionaire who manufactures weapons. He made his money off of selling arms.
Yeah.
And yet they've made him likable.
Yeah.
Which is, especially in that pit. I mean, really, Iron Man should not be a likable character on that basis alone.
Yeah.
But,
and heck, Hank Pym Ant-Man.
Yeah.
He doesn't start out his first, his first appearance isn't even really anything resembling a superhero story. It's actually more something resembling like a horror comic story, where he accidentally shrinks himself and then he's stuck in an anthill for most of the issue. It's dealing with how freaky the bugs are if you were their size.
But as I say, obviously, we're getting into. I'm with the sort of timeline now. There's definitely something that I do want to take a slight detour on something, and as we get into the 70s, I do want to talk for a little bit about what was going on with British comic books at the time. It would play into obviously because in the early 1980s you had the influx of British writers that would come into Marvel and DC. So it's interesting. I do think this is something I want to touch on.
Oh yeah, and there is something that I call it in my head. I call it the British invasion effect.
That's quite a common term for it, actually, Ring. So yeah.
Well, no, it not just for comics, but for media and culture in general, where Americans will just ignore something until it crosses over to England and then comes back, and then suddenly we're on board.
Yeah.
Well, I should perhaps take a detour then about because British comics had a very different story to American with the genres that were in comics that existed and were popular in Britain. I mean, you had obviously you had your funnies type things like the Beano and the Dandy with Dennis the Menace and Desperate Dan, but a big thing was sports comics like the Victor, and then Roy of the Rovers, who was a popular comic about a professional footballer. These were the big comics in Britain. I mean, you didn't really have the closest you had to a superhero was in a comic called in the 50s and 60s called the Eagle, which is a character called Dan Dare, who I suppose is kind of a bit like Flash Gordon, I suppose, but that had run its course.
But
however, there was something that happened there was a comic that then came out in the late 70s in Britain. Called 2000 AD, which was in 1977, which was a game changer in British comics. And it was people don't know 2000 AD. They will know the most famous character, Judge Dredd. And this is it gave starts to a whole number of writers and artists. Just to give you a few names: Pat Mills, Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons, Grant Morrison, Brian Boland, Mike McMahon, Garth Ennis, who would become, would end up writing, for like Marvel and DC at the point and become legends in the industry.
But basically, while America is having its like silver age censorship blandness, in Europe and the UK, we've got Tintin from Belgium, we've got Asterix and Obelix, coming out of France, and of course, Scummer, started talking about the comic scene in the UK.
Sammy mentioned the biggest Aussie one, which is Ginger Megs.
Yeah, and I do want to mention something that I am friends on Facebook with Pat Mills. And I'm going to actually try and get him onto my channel at some point. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I am planning on approaching him and asking him if he wants to come on. So, but
how old's Andy Cap?
Andy Cap was a newspaper comic, which I think is still going in the Mirror. I'm not sure because I haven't read the Mirror in years, but
but it's really old, isn't it?
It's really old, but those were newspaper strips.
But you can still, books came out later.
Yeah, it was like what we went to earlier when we said about how the original comic books were just reprints of newspaper strips.
Yeah.
Yes.
But so
1957 it started. So it actually.
So while in America, everything is hyper focused on superheroes because of censorship, in Europe and the UK and the rest of the world, the comics medium is branching out into a bunch of different genres.
Yeah.
And because of things being weakened in the, for the comics code being weakened by, Marvel and later DC beginning to push the boundaries, in the late 80s or late 70s, early 80s, we get an influx of British writers coming into the American comic scene and begin to enter the Bronze Age with a rather famous, no, I can't remember if the Bronze Age, or maybe it's the Bronze Age that ended with.
I mean, the Bronze Age is sometimes credited as started in 1970, but as you're coming into the later era of that from the late 70s to the early 80s, so I said, the quote unquote British invasion with the writers like the Alan Moores, the Grant Morrisons, Garth Ennis's, later on Neil Gaiman, coming in, they were definitely, it was game changers that they would either, and one or two American writers as well. I mean, as much as I dislike the man, Frank Miller, as much as I dislike the guy, he was definitely a game changer in the way these comics were written.
Oh yeah, like his run on Daredevil and and his Wolverine.
Yeah, and then obviously later his Batman, which basically was the inspiration for pretty much all the Batman movies that have come out in the last 25, 30 years. Was
we're talking about the British wave of authors into the American comic scene. So I guess we have to talk about the next, the big landmark thing that everybody talks about, that kind of what they point to when they discuss comics as literature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you got there before me. Sorry.
Yeah. Alan Moore's Watchmen.
Yeah.
This is I'm going to tell you now. If you have never read a superhero comic in your life, if you just think it's like superhero comics, please read this.
Honestly,
this is one of the best works, not just comics, but this is one of the best works of literature that I can think of that I've ever read.
Actually, I'd have to slightly disagree with you on that.
Okay.
So the thing is, Watchmen is a satire. Watchmen is a dark satire of the superhero comic.
Yeah.
As a genre, it's a genre deconstruction, and I feel as if you're going to, if we're going to get the most out of a genre deconstruction, you have to be at least familiar with the tropes and the visual language of the genre that's being deconstructed. So I feel like you should read at least a little bit of comics, specifically superhero comics, before you get into Watchmen. So you get the full impact.
But you could, I think you could also, if you just but even if you've just watched some comic book films, or whatever, you could read Watchmen and understand what Alan Moore is doing.
Yeah, fair enough.
I do, if you got any familiarity with the whole genre of superhero, whether it's you've read all the comics or whether you've just watched some of the films, whether it be MCU or even going back to like Christopher Reeve's Superman films kind of thing, you could read, you can read Alan Moore's Watchmen and you get where he's doing there.
And of course, Watchmen will eventually be its own stream. I just have to read it first.
You've not read Watchmen?
Yeah, I tried in high school, but I didn't manage to get through it.
Yeah.
But that was mostly because I was reading it at lunch in the high school library, so it was kind of a sporadic thing.
Okay. So I'm just trying to look what comics I've got down there. I know I've got a whole lot of Alan. I'm just looking for where's my copy of. Sorry. One of my other personal favorites, Alan Moore.
Oh yeah. Again. But now the thing about Alan Moore and the works of Alan Moore and Frank Miller and this wave of comic artists is we kind of got. Like the industry kind of got the wrong idea of why these became popular because these were comics that were saying something. These were comics that were discussing, the medium, the genre, in a critical manner and trying to make comics perceived as actual literature. What the industry took from it was things need to be bloody and gory and sexy and dirty and gritty.
So dark and dark and dark. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just
why we got Zack Snyder's DC Extended Universe.
Well, and also the 90s.
Even the original Batman movies with Jack Nicholson and
but
there with it was dark and gritty.
We want to get into the 90s.
Even in the Silver Age, Batman's always been kind of a darker character.
Oh, that's true.
We want to get into the 90s and dark shit.
Yeah.
Spawn!
And I got to say, I absolutely love Todd McFarlane's Spawn. I love it. It is and I mean Image Comics in itself was a kind of a bit of a revolution with these guys because
it's a shame they screwed up the movie.
Yeah, but I will say this: the HBO cartoon series of Spawn is awesome.
Haven't seen it.
It's fucking awesome.
So, and this is where we're getting into. I think it's termed as the Iron Age. I could be wrong, but really, it's the Edgelord. It's the Edgelord age, where all the where all the heroes are super brutal, and wear way too many pouches on their uniforms, and usually have mullets.
Is this the era where they actually made Superman kill certain enemies?
Well, actually,
this is the era where they actually killed Superman.
Yeah, actually, hold on.
Death of Superman.
Hold on. Let's see who wins this race.
Oh, I'm not looking it up.
But yeah,
so yeah, Darkseid and
Sorry, what are we looking at here?
When was the Death of Superman written?
In the 1990.
No, I think that was
I'm going to say
earlier, the original.
Death of Super. It's in the 90s. I know that. It's
okay. Let's see.
I'm guessing 93. It may have been 94.
$1992.
No, I wasn't far off.
You were close.
Yeah. So yeah, we're getting into,
which is also coincidentally the same year Image was launched.
The Death of Superman.
Yeah. Have you actually read the alternative ending for the fight of Superman and Doomsday?
Yeah.
Where Superman lobotomizes Doomsday with his heat vision.
Oh wow. But
yeah, he heat visions through Doomsday's eyes, burns out his retina, and lobotomizes him.
and because comics are an industry, there have always been two pressures on the development of comic books. The societal pressures that dictate the development of any art medium.
Yeah.
And then the economic pressures. As we get into the 90s, these collide once again.
There was the speculation boom of the 90s.
Yes.
And as what happens with all booms,
but the bubble has to burst. So because of the works of Alan Moore and Frank Miller, comics are taking a darker turn. But also in the 90s, older issues where momentous things happened are becoming valuable, because since they were printed on cheap paper and were marketed towards children, there are very, mint issues that survive, issues that survived in good condition are rare and thus valuable. So the comics industry started churning out big events like the Death of Superman, or in Marvel's instance, a good example to point to is the Clone Saga, the infamous
Spider-Man's.
that
was dreadful.
Where if you wanted, all you had to do to get an issue to sell gangbusters was make some big game-changing event, and then all the people who think it'll be valuable in the future would snap up as many copies as they can buy.
The only two good things to come out of that was Ben, the reasonable clone of Spidey who lived for ages, and Kane as a clone that didn't work properly but still survived.
This was a I mean, and so his image very much burst onto the scene at this time, and I think it's kind of really got big off of the speculative boom with comics.
Yeah.
And I mean, Image was, Image for a while, like Spawn was outselling Batman and Spider-Man for a while.
Yeah.
But I think they got very, I mean, because of the way they were so loosely structured as well, they really got they really thought the good times were going to last forever on the back of the speculative boom. And
yeah,
even though Image is still in business today, they kind of they really started going. They really suffered when it hit when the shit hit the fan with that.
Yeah.
Marvel,
so did Dark Horse a bit,
yeah.
but I mean, they still had Star Wars to kind of surf on.
Well, Marvel obviously at one point ended up going bankrupt.
Oh yeah, Marvel went bankrupt off the comics bust, and actually the only reason they survived as a company is they sold the film rights to their characters to a bunch of different studios.
Yep.
Hence why you had all these issues with like Fox and Disney and whatever, and X-Men and whatever over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah.
Especially the Sony, I think Marvel wasn't so bad not having X-Men under their wing, although they probably regret Fantastic Four to a certain extent. But selling Spider-Man to Sony is probably the thing they regret the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still. I mean, I know they've got an agreement with Sony now, but it's still a thing over their head that because Spider-Man is the bankable character, and they fucked it.
But yeah, so basically the late 80s and the 90s was essentially a rebellion against the restrictions of the Comics Code Authority. And now modern day, unfortunately, like as things probably would have, now that we've reached the point where comics as a medium could potentially grow and become something of its own, where it's kind of hampered by the popularity of the superhero movie, because now comic books are essentially becoming like, instead of being used as its own artistic medium, it's basically a test run for ideas.
It is.
Yeah. And it's obviously because of some of the things that have gone on with Marvel and obviously, the whole Disney, Fox, and whatever, and Sony issues. I mean, one of the comics that has been struggling in recent years is X-Men.
Yeah.
It has struggled, and it's like that they're not putting the effort. But there's one character that kind of came under the X-Men that's under that umbrella, which is a cash cow for Marvel, although they didn't have the film rights because it's kind of under the X-Men.
Yeah.
I'm wearing this T-shirt, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Deadpool is a cash cow for Marvel right now.
Yeah.
And he was a legit parody of Wade Wilson.
Slade Wilson of Deathstroke,
Wilson.
Yeah.
But I mean,
well, actually, fun thing about Deadpool being a parody of Deathstroke. So, Deathstroke was the main antagonist for the second incarnation of the Teen Titans. That the 70s run of the Teen Titans, the new Teen Titans. You know what book Deadpool Wade Wilson first appeared in?
Oh, well, off the top of my head, I can't remember.
New Mutants.
Yeah, okay. That I get that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think in the early days of Deadpool, it was, I suppose, it was just a blatant rip-off and not too much humor in it.
No, that's not true. Because when they commissioned the character, the idea was, we'll take the parody on his name and we'll take his powers to a super extreme and we'll shove him in the universe with the mutants and everything. But one of the stipulations was that came from Stan Lee was, what if we had Spider-Man with no boundaries and we knew exactly what he was thinking all the time? So you take Spider-Man and you take the personality of Peter Parker, who's almost breaking that third wall during his things, and you break that third wall.
Fourth wall.
Fourth wall. Sorry, not the third wall, the fourth wall. Yeah, sorry.
Well, the thing is, the fourth wall breaking is something that kind of just developed over time.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, I think this is probably a bit of retconning from Stan Lee himself.
Yeah.
But
Deadpool was a dying kind of character, like a dying strip.
Yeah.
That a lot of the stuff that made him popular was the fact that, for lack of a better terms, it was Marvel writers giving this character that wasn't going anywhere, and they just basically decided to, for lack of a better term, to jack off with him and have a bit of fun and just like. And it got popular because he was like, he was self-aware. He broke the fourth wall. He knew he was a comic book character in a comic book. But what I think makes Deadpool so good is that, generally speaking, he knows what's going on. The characters around him don't.
Yeah.
That's what makes him work.
And everyone else is so serious, but he is not.
Yeah.
And he also knows no matter what, he's not getting killed.
But this is, I mean, one of the funny, I don't know, it's like one of the funniest panels I ever remember seeing. It was like, he's in a thing where he's teaming up with Daredevil and Deadpool's just doing what he, and Daredevil's like, will you be serious? There's like people trying to kill us. He said, Daredevil's like, no, Deadpool's like, well, I use humor to hide my insecurities, but I'm also funny as fuck, so don't hate on me.
Yeah. I like the one with him with Spidey where Spider-Man's spider senses going off and he's figuring out something's happening on and goes, what is that thing that you've got? Deadpool goes, referring to the fact that he knows Spidey's got a spider.
One of my favorite things with Deadpool. This was a bit of fan fiction done on YouTube.
Okay.
But it is actually something that if you read the comics, you could see Deadpool doing. And he sneaks into Spider-Man's apartment and switches, his web fluid.
Yeah.
For silly string. And like then it gets on there and it's like I'm gonna I'm pranking Spider-Man kind of thing, and it says, what am I gonna do to get Spider-Man out there? And then Deadpool pulls a gun out and shoots someone. So Spider-Man's like, it's like, what's happened here? And jumps out the window. And as he's like there, not on the floor, Deadpool's like, ha, you got pranked. And he's like, oh, fuck, he's dead.
But having said that, there's actually a comic book where Spider-Man actually gets in contact with Deadpool for Deadpool's help to overcome and I cannot remember what the name of the character is, but the evil character is one that knows what its enemy's going to do, knows what the person he's fighting is going to do beforehand, so he's got a precognition and knows what the enemy's going to do before.
Can I just say that PJ in the chat, I love Daredevil as well.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that Netflix series totally rescued it from that abortion of a film with Ben Affleck.
Jen, I think you might be talking about when Deadpool fought Taskmaster, whose basic shtick is he can copy anyone's fighting style, and because he knows how they fight, he'll know what they'll do next, and Deadpool just wins by randomly doing stuff.
That was exactly it.
He's too erratic.
The comic book actually starts with Spidey, and Spidey cannot beat him. So he asks Deadpool to come and help him. And it's like, you can't fight Deadpool. He's too erratic. There is no way to know what he's going to do.
So that does one last thing, since we went through a good, the history. One last thing I want to cover.
Yeah.
Is because the thing is, with comics as a medium, a lot of the tropes either are a lot of the tropes unique to comics actually serve a purpose, originally served a purpose within the storytelling. And the trope that I definitely wanted to make room for in the stream is the pre-team up fight.
Let me have a look for something.
Yeah.
Let me have a look for something. And this
commonly is used between Spider-Man and Venom.
No. Commonly used whenever the companies like DC and Marvel decide to put their differences aside.
And do a crossover.
And do a crossover. And I can't find the goddamn thing anywhere. But somewhere down here, I have got Batman. I have got Batman Spawn somewhere down here.
Though I
can't find it.
Or commonly used whenever any company decides to do a crossover between two books.
Yeah.
I mean, what always happens to the two heroes? They have a misunderstanding, a big fight. Strangely enough, that they tend to have like villains crossover who never seem to have problems with one another.
You think that the villains would have that.
For some reason, the Kingpin and Lex Luthor are not going to have a problem with one another, but Spider-Man and Superman will.
Yeah.
So
and that this is from that. This is less of a thing in DC Comics because just how they've built their universe to where superheroes are essentially, one, well known, and two, always kind of well respected, because they did a lot of their growth and defined themselves under the CCA, while Marvel did basically became established by pushing the boundaries of the CCA. So it is more. It is a trope more associated with Marvel team ups. But
sorry, found it.
Yeah.
This is a Spawn Batman thing that was published by Image.
Oh,
Todd McFarlane, and I also say it's not a great comic, but I think you can also if it's notable for anything, it's the point when Frank Miller jumped the shark.
Yeah. I've got a copy of Batman versus the Predator.
Yeah. See, I didn't think that was that bad. I thought that was a really good idea.
It's really good.
Good idea for a comic.
Yeah, but anyways, so it is a trope, but here's the reason behind it. So the way the comics industry is structured is each main characters have their own books. So in the early days, when you'd have two books that were crossing over, you'd have readers from each book that, didn't really know the other character. So so the utility of this trope is you have a way to show off to the readers of the other book what this character can do. Essentially, it's a good introduction to new readers
if you don't know the other books.
Yeah. Basically, Spider-Man and Daredevil are crossing paths. And Spider-Man readers are like, who's this Daredevil? Who's this Daredevil guy? This weird guy in the yellow and red, costume that looks like it was put together by a blind man. Yeah. And no, seriously, it was. I'm just gonna find something real quick.
Yeah. Put together by a blind man when you mentioned Daredevil.
No, seriously, the original Daredevil costume looks like it was put together by a blind man.
Oh, it was awful. It was awful.
Yeah. Oh, wait, hold on.
DD.
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, the original Daredevil costume was bad.
Yeah. And hashtag sorry, not sorry for assaulting your eyes with this.
Oh, you found it. Mm-hmm. Oh, my God.
Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah, like I said, it looks... So, yeah, but the thing is, it actually looks like it was put together by a blind man.
Yeah, no sense of color.
Yeah.
But having said that...
Was that Jack Kirby who did the art on that?
I think so. I
just realized we've gone all the way through this stream and we've not mentioned Jack Kirby once.
Yeah.
To be fair, that's no worse than the original Green Lantern.
Yeah.
I mean, if we were to talk about obviously legendary figures in the comic industry, I just realized we got 2 hours into this, and I just thought to mention Jack Kirby.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, we were doing a very broad view look at like just the entire history of the medium.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, you could do 2 or 3 streams on Kirby alone.
Yeah.
Well, he's influencing other things as well. I mean, he did a lot of illustrations for a lot of other stuff too.
No, so. they never explained the choice. All we know is that Matt Murdock made it. So, I mean, it looks like it was put together by a blind man, so I buy it.
I think basically what I gather, somebody told Stan Lee he'd look better in red, so they did that.
Yeah.
Well, they changed it basically, from what I gather.
Yeah.
Which I could kind of believe,
Yeah. But yes, Jack Kirby, a god among comic artists.
Yeah.
Because, well, not Spider-Man, because that was Steve Ditko, but the Fantastic Four,
X-Men,
the
Hulk,
Iron Man.
Yeah. He went on to do some stuff with DC later as well, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, basically, because he wanted to do. So what Jack Kirby wanted to do?
If you want to go back further, Jack Kirby was in the Golden Age. Captain America.
Oh yeah. Jack Kirby made Captain America.
Yeah, that's how long Jack Kirby goes back. He went from the Golden Age through the Silver Age into the Bronze Age, and was involved with so many iconic characters. And he's a co-creator with either Stan Lee or whoever it may be.
Well, he's also the one who came up with the idea of the Inhumans and the Eternals.
Mm.
Yeah.
And yes, PJ, red was a better choice for Daredevil. But anyways, so yeah.
Oh, wow.
So technically, Darkseid is a Marvel Universe character. Technically. Because, okay, so canonically speaking, in the DC universe, New Genesis and Apocalypse are on a different plane. That's why you can only get there via BoomTube, right?
Yeah.
Well, so the thing is, Jack Kirby always wanted to do this comic book about new gods and all the other gods, being dead.
Yeah. He
Marvel wouldn't let him do it.
Yeah, he did that in DC, didn't he?
Yeah. So when he went over to DC, he did his New Gods comic, where we got New Genesis and Apocalypse, and Darkseid and the New Gods characters that people aren't familiar with because they aren't as iconic as Darkseid. But in that comic, in that introduction, he shows like complete devastation, and in that panel, you can actually see the Marvel Mjolnir. So technically, Apocalypse and New Genesis are in a Marvel universe.
Proposed concepts for a Spider-Man by Jack Kirby before Ditko took on the artwork.
Yeah, Dick, I like.
Yeah.
I don't like that at all.
Jack Kirby. That's one of the things that that Stan Lee was having some arguments with Jack Kirby over this Spider-Man and gave it to Steve Ditko. Well, this is Stan Lee's version of that, but
yeah.
But just amazing. Microraptors brought out New Gods, replacing the old ones. Is basically the plot of American Gods.
Yeah,
it is.
And I just know Microraptor. Do you know where Neil Gaiman comes from? Original comic.
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman's, he wrote stuff before he did comics, but he rose to fame through the Sandman series, which is again
a DC comic.
It's it's under the Vertigo label, I think, which is owned by DC.
I think Vertigo is DC's adult line.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would say again, if you like fantasy stuff, if you've never read a comic before, and if you're into fantasy, read Neil Gaiman's Sandman.
Yeah.
And I mean the great thing Neil Gaiman always says is that he always got comic book shop owners thanking him for actually bringing women into comic book stores when he wrote the Sandman.
Yeah.
Which was an interesting compliment. But Sandman is I mean, this is the comic that won the World Fantasy Awards.
Yeah.
And then they changed the rules the very next day to make sure it never happened again. But because of Neil Gaiman's take on the Shakespeare Midsummer Night's Dream thing that he did in Sandman.
But well, that's the thing is, the comic books as a medium have all, like, aside from in World War II when they were very popular as a morale booster among the troops. Like, aside from that blip of World War II, comic books were always seen as kiddie fodder. And this perception led to, seduction of the innocent, which led to the CCA. And, this, like, the perception of this entire artistic medium of just kids stuff is probably the largest force that hampers the acceptance and development of a valid artistic medium, and it really pisses me off.
Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway thing, because it is people look down their nose at comics as a form of literature.
Yeah.
Well, because they think of kids' cartoons in the comics section of a newspaper. That's why.
Yeah, and again, I think an awful lot. If you go into fifth, would the restrictions the Comics Code Authority put on the development of comics as well, that didn't help. But it's that whole thing of but it's that this is a sort of almost a snobbishness about, oh, you got to look at picture books, have you? You can't understand the words.
Yeah.
And people, and I mentioned him a minute ago, Neil Gaiman summed this up brilliantly. When he was at school, he went and asked someone who was in charge of the school library, why don't you have any comic books in the school? And he's like, why do you want to read them, Gaiman? Or, he said, comic books are for idiots. He said, why do you like comic books? He says, I like them. I think they're really good. He says, well, and he's had this argument. He says, only idiots read them. He says, really? He says, Neil Gaiman pointed out to him, I'm probably the only kid in this school that has read every single book in this library.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how much of a reader he was. And I think they're great. And he wanted to write comics. He looked for his opportunity to write comic books. And Neil Gaiman is now, obviously, he doesn't do much comic in the way of comics now, but things like American Gods and his collaborations with Terry Pratchett and stuff on like Good Omens stuff. Neil Gaiman's a highly respected fantasy author now.
Yeah,
but comics are comics. So I could obviously go for the obvious, like any Watchmen panel, but really, comics are just kiddie stuff.
Really?
Yeah. Really. For those of you who aren't aware, this is a panel from a famous X-Men issue called God Loves, Man Kills.
Yeah.
I saw Nightcrawler.
What is his name? Nightcrawler.
Yeah. The Reverend William F. Stryker is pointing at Nightcrawler, saying, "You dare call that thing human?" But yeah, comics are just kiddie stuff.
Yeah. No.
Comics don't have anything to say. Comics are not a legitimate artistic medium. Not at all.
The best thing about comics is they're a reflection of the times they were written in.
Yeah. Well, either a reflection or striving against.
They're a reflection. Sometimes, sometimes they're pushed into, because of the times they're in. Yeah. They're pushed into more radical lines of thought, but because they get swept up with the times. I mean, people talk about the whole thing with the revolutionary Marvel made with in the 60s and whatever. Most of the people at Marvel were sort of very stuffy conservative guys. Stan Lee at best was mildly liberal, but yet they broke all those boundaries with the ideas that they were willing to put across.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was a reflection of the times, and they saw where things were going and always got pushed with the times. And then you get to obviously the 80s and you see, like Alan Moore doing some stuff like V for Vendetta, where the hero of the story is, for all intents and purposes, an anarchist terrorist. You see where it goes to. And also on the subject of Alan Moore, We've got a fantastic black and white comic here.
Yeah,
it's a brick of a book. It's an absolute brick.
Yeah.
But if we want to talk about stuff that's outside of the superhero genre,
yeah,
this is black and white. This is all the art is in black and white, but it's this one. It's called From Hell.
Oh
It's
yeah, about Jack the Ripper.
It's the Jack the Ripper story. But I will say this: if it's a lot of it, you got to understand it's Alan Moore's own interest in the occult and stuff in there, but probably the most unique take on the whole Jack the Ripper thing that I've ever read.
Yeah. And
isn't that why they made a movie of it too?
Yeah,
the movie,
and of course, this is Kitty stuff right here.
Yeah,
and this is from Snowbirds Don't Fly, which is a Green Lantern and Green Arrow issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you, Microraptor. Haven't read a lot of comics as an adult, but I have a huge respect for the medium.
Yeah.
There's a comic I liked about a woman growing up in Iran, I think, who then moves to France. I can't remember the name of it, though.
Off the top of my head, that's not ringing any bells, but...
Yeah. And... so, any other final thoughts?
I think we covered it pretty much.
I think we covered it, a lot of it, and I guess it is just that thing of treat this as comics should be treated as a very legitimate form of literature and art and a medium.
Yeah.
There is some just great stories told in comics.
Yeah.
And it's not a medium that people should look down upon.
Yeah. Another good example, though I haven't read it, is Mouse.
I haven't read that actually,
but yeah, it's basically written by cripes, but it's essentially the story of the Holocaust as a comic.
Yeah.
Well, you want to?
It can, but
I haven't read it, so.
But it can convey comics can convey that message with. And people, I think the way people look at it is, it's giving you pictures. Therefore, if you can't imagine it with a dialogue, giving you those visuals sometimes is really powerful.
Yeah, and you can learn from comics too.
Does. Yeah,
I mean, there's a historian YouTuber who he does a lot of different eclectic content, but his name's Lindy Beige. And I don't know if you know who that is, Jeff, but he is doing the historical background reference for a comic book series on Hannibal, who you were talking about during your earlier stream. So
there you go. Look at what History and I have been doing for the last 6 months.
Yeah, so I mean that's the thing. There is great comics out there that can tell these historical stories or parodies of what happened in history that give you an image of what history was.
I've got one here called Northlanders, which is more of like a sort of collection of short stories about like the Viking Age.
Yeah.
I don't know how historically accurate a lot of this is. Probably not that much, but It gives you a feel.
As long as they haven't got horns on their helmets.
No, they don't. It's got a real feel. It gives you a real feel for the age.
Yeah, if you want to get your ideas of Vikings from Hagar the Horrible, you're going to get it very well.
I guarantee you, it's probably more. Well, actually, I'll say even Hagar the Horrible is probably more historically accurate than the series Vikings. But
but
yeah, that's the thing. It doesn't just have to be superheroes, but that doesn't mean you can't learn things from superhero comics either.
I thought it might be because when Microraptor, you said comic about growing up in Iran. I thought Persepolis. I kind of browsed through it once. I haven't, but I didn't actually read it. So I thought you were thinking of Persepolis, but I didn't say so because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and I will be a slightly pedantic right here because being pedantic is apparently my brand. I won't say that comic books are technically literature because they're more like a hybrid of literature and visual art. But that doesn't change the fact that comic books are their own medium and are valid as an artistic medium, just like film, just like literature, just like painting.
Yeah.
And eventually, somewhere in the near future, I'm gonna kind of revisit this topic. And
yeah.
Because I'm going to talk about a pair of graphic novels from a series that is about the superhero comic genre. I am going to be talking about Kurt Busiek's Astro City, specifically The Tarnished Angel and Confessions. But I'm waiting on. I'm waiting to talk about Confessions until I can get an ex-Catholic who's read it. But
I wonder who you have in mind.
Well, I
just saying.
I mean, I basically sent up the bat signal. If you follow my Twitter, you can see where I tweeted at Ben Melzebub and Julie Lavoie and Hissy, of course. It's like, hey, have any of you guys read Confessions? It's fairly accessible. It's in most libraries I've been to.
Yeah.
But Astro City is essentially a series of, a comic series about a city full of superheroes, and it's about day-to-day life in that city. So it's basically a commentary on the superhero genre.
Okay.
Yeah. But like I said, that's in the near future, waiting on guests I can get. Because it is kind of a niche. It's not that well known of a title. But any other last words?
No. I think I'm good.
Not massively. But yeah. I've given. Yeah, I think I've shared some of my favorites that I like. Spawn's a favorite of mine. Watchmen, which I highly recommend to anyone. One Well, pretty much most stuff Alan Moore's done, I've got to say, I'm going to recommend to most people. So,
though though Alan Moore can be a bit problematic.
Oh, cool. Yeah, of course he can. I
will say,
he's generally.
I wouldn't suggest Alan. I'd be careful about suggesting certain Alan Moore titles to younger audiences.
Oh, good. No, I'm not going to I'm not going to recommend V for Vendetta or The Killing Joke to kids.
Yeah.
No, definitely not The Killing Joke.
Even though I think it is one of the best Batman graphic novels ever, I wouldn't recommend The Killing Joke to children at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally speaking, Alan Moore's on the right side of the tracks on most things. So,
and PJ. So,
no,
because
they didn't.
However, Bronze Age Norsemen likely did have horned helmets for ritual purposes.
Yeah, ceremonial.
That is literally the closest you can get to Vikings and horned helmets.
I'm sure Hissy and I have talked about this at length on one of our Asterix streams, actually.
Unfortunately, it was during Asterix and the Great Divide.
Great Crossing, yeah.
Yeah, and the Great Crossing. Yeah. Why do I keep saying Great Divide?
Yeah, it's a thing that never happened.
Yeah.
Because they're entirely impractical.
Yeah. So, and also, if you are an American watching this, I definitely suggest looking into books like Asterix and Obelix, Tintin, Valerian, and Lorelei. To get a look at what comics could have been.
And don't forget to check out the Japanese stuff.
The mangas, obviously.
We
haven't talked about mangas, So.
Well, manga, to an extent, the West's fascination with all things Chinese over the last 10, 20 years has probably helped the resurgence of other comic books to a large degree.
Yeah.
Because manga and anime just became a big thing, and it's like, oh, well, what's our culture version of it?
But I'd say again, as I mentioned earlier, some of the British comics that time, go back and look at some of the old 2000 ADs.
Yeah.
Judge Dredd, and there's one of them. It's not even a superhero comic, but it's a First World War comic by Pat Mills called Charlie's War, which is a brilliant strip.
Yeah. I will say the closest thing, the closest book I've read, and it may actually count as a manga, it may not. The closest book I've read to manga was I did read a lot of Usagi, Usagi Yojimbo.
Yeah.
To be honest, okay, now I know where the parody of Yugasi and Bojo comes from in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Actually, in the 2000 series, they did bring Usagi on as a character. Semi-recurring character. He showed up in a couple different episodes.
I know that's a comic we haven't discussed in this, but Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a satire on other comic books.
How it
started.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was essentially the 90s, bronze/iron/edge age was basically built off a satire of the Silver Age.
Yeah.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a satire of the 90s.
Yeah, it was a satire of mainly there's several Frank Miller's things.
Frank Miller's Daredevil.
Daredevil. The 47 Ronin, which is again with Frank Miller, but but there was just the whole. I mean, if you just look at some of the characters in that, Splinter is a take on Stick.
Yeah.
And
the Foot is a take on the Hand.
The Foot Clan is a take on the Hands. A group with it. Basically, I mean, it was not even I mean, it was almost out and out parody. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, which people and yet that was a weird one that took on a life of its own. People think there's a real like kiddie friendly comic. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was an adult comic when that started.
Yeah.
That was an adult comic. It was a piss take and a satire on other comics at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a character in these shows, Ugasi and Boch. So okay, that's why I thought went along those lines. It's like, okay, I know where that came from now.
But yeah, seriously, hold on. Doing computer things. Yeah, tell me that.
Shredder,
yeah, that. And yeah, you can like TMNT. I like TMNT.
Yeah, I like it. PJ, I'm not knocking it. I just say a lot of people are not that familiar with the origins of that comic because they think of it as a kid-friendly thing, which it kind of became when it became a toy thing. It was like when it was used to sell toys. The original comics were very much an adult thing.
Yeah.
And were a satire on the whole sort of genre at the time, or the whole medium at the time, and things that were going on within comic books.
And well, and actually in there was a crossover issue in Usagi where with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But yeah, Usagi's the samurai rabbit.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
And yes, I'm a fan of the 2000 cartoon because
I'm at the age where I was a fan of the original cartoon and I didn't understand where it all came from, but I'm of that age.
Yeah.
You know, and I will tell you this now, for like a couple of years in like late 80s, about 1989, 1990, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was like the biggest thing in pop culture.
Yeah.
You know, but it definitely, the original Mirage books or whatever of by Eastman and Laird, just absolute satire of what was going on in comics at the time.
Yeah,
most of it pointed at Frank Miller, I've got to say, but
and you can recognize that it's a satire and still enjoy it. In fact, recognizing it as a satire could perhaps enhance your enjoyment of it.
Yeah.
And with that, I think we'll move into shilling.
Oh, I'm not going to show. I already showed earlier. I'm good.
Okay.
I've got nothing like planned in terms of streams coming up that I've got penciled in. Look out for me this week on Dave's channel. I'm probably sure I'll be on one or two of them.
And I'll figure out a topic for next week. But yeah, we're getting into peak, so that means I'm probably going to be too tired to do edited content. So, more of the same. Secular D&D on Saturdays, Media Musings today. And with that, remember, indoctrination is a hell of a selfie stick, so don't choke on it.
Salute.
Bye.
Ring, you're supposed to end the stream, not cut yourself out of it.
Yeah. It's all right. We can talk for a bit.
See ya.
Bye.